reached the Taliban administration in Doha. Conversations between the European Union and the Taliban administration or the regime in Afghanistan as to how they're going to take things forward. I'm being joined in this exclusive conversation with European Union's Envoy for Afghanistan, Ambassador Tomas Niklasson. Many thanks for joining us here, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin with your takeaway from the meetings that you've had, or the meetings and engagements that the European Union has had with the Taliban. Where is it headed?
So these were the first talks we had with representatives of the Taliban appointed interim government in Kabul, and we met them in Doha. We do not recognize the Taliban, as you know. We also made that clear in the meeting. What we wanted to talk to them about were what the European foreign ministers have defined as benchmarks for our engagement. Some call these principles. And these are basically 5 benchmarks. It's about an inclusive government. It's about preserving the gains made in Afghanistan over the last 20 years in terms of rights of women, girls, minorities. It's about what we call safe passage for Afghans under threat. It's about counter-terrorism, and it's about making sure that humanitarian assistance, which the Afghan people needs, that they have access to humanitarian assistance as it is provided.
Let's start with the humanitarian assistance aspect, because that's a very important one. That's something that the European Union and the West is really focusing on. €1 billion pledge in terms of assistance, what that really is going to translate to in terms of a breakup, if you could just elaborate on the pledge.
So there was a pledging conference in Geneva in September, organized by the UN Secretary General, and the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made a pledge of up to €1 billion for Afghanistan and its neighbors. As the first parts of that package, we have now increased our humanitarian assistance from 50 million close to 60 million to 300 million, so basically 5-fold. We're also looking into providing what we call humanitarian plus assistance, because we have stopped all development assistance, which in the past largely went through trust funds, through the government, and that assistance has stopped. What we're now looking into is whether we can help sustain basic services, particularly education, health. Can we contribute to incentivize teachers, nurses, doctors, while channeling this through UN organizations, not through the government? And that would be up to another 250 million. So we're talking about roughly 600 million euros. And we will then have to see what the needs are. The situation is evolving with neighboring countries. Where do they see the need for assistance, and what can we do?
Well, in terms of the humanitarian assistance, we know that Afghanistan is going to suffer a very harsh winter. Now, in terms of the assistance reaching the people, what's the means? You're saying you do not recognize the Taliban regime, so who is going to assist the European Union in ensuring that aid reaches the people of Afghanistan? How is it that you intend to do it? And will that aid reach within this winter, or will it take longer?
These are really important questions. On the first one, on how we will provide humanitarian assistance, in a way, this is nothing new for us. We have been active in Afghanistan and we have provided humanitarian assistance for more than 2 decades. And a substantial part of that assistance was provided in areas controlled by the Taliban, not through the Taliban, but through UN organizations, through NGOs. And that's exactly the same way we will continue to work on that. The Taliban committed also in Doha that humanitarian assistance will not be under taxation. And they also recognized the importance that women participate, both in assessing the needs and in delivering the assistance. Will the money reach people in need? We do our utmost to make sure that happens. We have people in place in Kabul, international staff, who work day and night to make sure that it happens. But the needs are enormous. And there are also challenges in bringing money into the country, which we hope can be addressed.
Ambassador Sir, the other aspect that you speak of is inclusivity. In your conversations with the Taliban, what is the kind of conversation that you've had in terms of the red lines, saying thus far and no further? We have disturbing reports that we've been putting out of how women are being oppressed in Afghanistan. We have disturbing reports of beheadings, torture, killings that have begun against those who've served for foreign missions, including yours and ours, and such persecution continues. So are there red lines in the inclusivity? Are we looking at Hazara community being included as well? What's the conversation there?
So the conversation we had, I started by talking about their claim for recognition. And I said, you want to have international recognition, but it's at least equally important to have domestic recognition. And this is where inclusivity is so important. What we mean by inclusivity, and this may not be restricted, there may be more aspects, but what I have in mind and what I mentioned in the meeting was inclusivity in terms of ethnicity, in terms of various sects, in terms of political affiliation, and in terms of gender. What we have now is a government that is very largely composed of Pashtun, that is entirely composed of Taliban, and that is to a very large extent composed of Haqqani network Taliban, and there is not one single woman. So there's quite some work to be done to move into a truly inclusive government and a government that represents its people.
You mentioned the Haqqani network, so I will move to the question of concerns regarding security situation in Afghanistan. Another aspect that you've spelled out with regards to Afghan soil not being used for terror activities. Where do you think Afghanistan stands there? Because the recent reports really are concerning. They are worrisome because there are reports of how they are regrouping, they are getting space, and it seems like for someone sitting here in New Delhi, it would be of greater concern than any other country in the world.
It is of great concern, and it is also of concern for the Taliban. We see reports of, in particular, Daesh, Khorasan, expanding its network. We see reports about other organizations, including organizations that may be harmful and be a threat to India. I do not know whether they expand, but they are certainly present. There is still a presence, as we know, of Al-Qaeda. The Taliban make commitments, but like the other commitments, we need to see them move from words to action. And this is something we will continue to focus on. Security issues are extremely important for neighboring countries, for countries in the region, but also for international partners.
In the larger context, the role of Pakistan, again, a concern for India, because we see where Pakistan stands when it comes to Afghanistan and the Taliban regime. Is there any way in ensuring that there is stability in Afghanistan without countries like Pakistan or China or Russia, for that matter, gaining leverage through means of destabilizing the region?
My focus is on trying to build consensus and contribute to consensus on the threats, on the challenges, and seeing where we can work together. You can try to put countries in various categories as being spoilers, as being helpful, as being not so constructive. It doesn't help the discussion. And we quickly move into history of what has happened. Also, Western countries have been accused by some for playing a role that they shouldn't have played. So my focus, and this may be a limited one, but this is what I work on as much as I can, is really now to see how we, the European Union, together with partners in the region, those partners include Russia, those partners include also outside the region, those partners include China, those partners include Pakistan and India and the Central Asian states and Iran, to see where we agree. And I see a converging analysis of the situation with different priorities perhaps, but if we can continue to explain to the Taliban that these are, to the interim government, these are the things we all are concerned about, these are the things you need to move on, there's a much better chance that we will achieve or contribute to change than if we are busy accusing each other of doing or not doing the right things.
There are certain reports that the European Union could reopen mission in Kabul. Is that likely to happen, or are we looking at certain officials being sent there for humanitarian assistance?
We already have people on the ground in Kabul. We have international staff working on humanitarian assistance, as I mentioned. We're also considering sending a few people into Kabul, not at ambassadorial level, not as it was in the past, where we had a very substantial presence, but we see the need for having people who can help further with the humanitarian analysis and the humanitarian assistance, and who can also facilitate what we call safe passage. This will depend on the security situation. It will depend on what we can put in place to protect our staff, and that is an absolute priority for us. But these discussions are being held, and I wouldn't be surprised, provided the right guarantees can be given, that that could happen relatively soon.
But reopening the mission is not a part of the plan in the near future, given that it would tantamount to recognizing the administration?
We are not thinking of reopening the mission in any way similar to what we had in the past. We are really looking at minimal presence on the ground.
Aid to Afghanistan and people of Afghanistan, has there been difficulty in reaching out and reaching the people?
Do you mean in recent times,
yes,
or do you mean
now? For the aid to reach the people.
There are challenges. The situation is dire. It didn't start on the 15th of August. There were around 3 million or more internally displaced people. Afghanistan was affected by COVID, affected by drought, affected by the conflict. And now we have a situation where the economy is basically is very heavily affected. And there are liquidity problems, as mentioned. There's a lack of money, and there are restrictions on transfers of money into the country, and there's a huge need to scale up. So yes, it is difficult in terms of doing enough sufficiently fast, but we haven't seen substantial limitations in terms of, for example, money being diverted or money not reaching the people. Well, money, it's not money, it's also, of course, supplies, food, clothes, medicine. They reach the people. The question is, do we do enough? Do we do enough sufficiently fast? And that's what we really put a priority on achieving right now.
India's faced a challenge too in sending across aid to Afghanistan. Pakistan has been an impediment. Pakistan has not allowed Indian aid. Is that a part of the conversation in how countries should be allowed to provide aid without any hindrance, Pakistan being one for India?
Well, first of all, we very much appreciate India's offer. It's substantial, it's generous, and I understand it's about 50,000 metric tons of wheat. That's what we think is important. I've heard during the visit here references to some issues with Pakistan, but I'm not sure what the nature is of those, and I understand that conversation is going on between India and Pakistan, and of course I hope that a solution can be found.
You met with the Foreign Secretary. What do you think India's role can be in forging peace in Afghanistan?
I met with the Foreign Secretary, I met with two of your Deputy National Security Advisors, I met with the Joint Secretary responsible for Afghanistan, Pakistan and Iran, who I met before. We see India as a partner. It's not our only partner. We have several partners in the region. But I think India is well recognized in Afghanistan for the contribution it has made in development assistance. And development assistance very close to the people throughout the country. Your connection to Afghanistan goes far back. My understanding from speaking to Afghans is that you are very well respected. And I hear a willingness, with some concerns on the Indian side, to remain engaged. And that is something we very much welcome. And I think such an engagement would definitely contribute or increase the likelihood of peaceful development in Afghanistan.
Before I let you go, my final question: recognizing a regime such as the Taliban, what are the parameters that they will have to fulfill for them to be recognized, to have a seat at the UN? Will they? Because that's one thing that they're pushing for. They've been asking for their ambassador designate to be recognized as the permanent representative to the UN. So here, Shaheen.
For the time being, this has not been defined. What has been agreed among all partners, also partners with very different political systems, different positions in the region, different positions on the Taliban, is that for the time being, no one is ready to recognize the Taliban. From our perspective, there are reasons for that. It is the way in which they took power by force. And there are also many concerns regarding how they feel whether they feel committed by their international conventions Afghanistan has signed, for example. There are issues relating to democracy. They have basically put themselves in a situation where they leave the rest of the world with many, many questions. And I cannot give you a list of the 4 points they have to address to become recognized. There's a lot of mistrust to be overcome. There's a lot of trust to be built, and that trust should come from action and not just from words.
Ambassador Tomas Niklasson, thanks for joining us here on India Today. Indeed a pleasure. That was the European Union's envoy for Afghanistan, speaking exclusively to India Today on the issues that matter the most. Afghanistan is going through a very rough patch, and it is only going to get tougher all through this winter.